described as animated. Pero que las alas arraiguen y sus raíces vuelen. Our wings ground us and our roots make us fly. This quote by the Nobel Prize-winning Spanish poet Juan Ramón Jiménez is often invoked in the discussion of flamenco tradition. Off the top of my head, I think of the album by Carmen Linares, Alas y Raíces, and most recently, words from the Roma activist Joaquín López Bustamante in descriptions of Belén Maya's solo work, Romnia, in 2015. Most of my written work deals with contemporary artists who consider themselves part of the flamenco tradition, even though the work they are doing is usually transgressing some structure that is held sacred. These words represent for me the continuous counter-tension, not a binary, but a constant of what I've called cultural legacy and experimental imperative. The words resonate for me particularly because they capture the distinct physical experience of dancing flamenco with its grounded stance, raíces, and its arms that reach into the air, alas, no? I privilege these metaphors because as a practitioner, I constantly negotiate the physical experience of dancing traditional forms with their oral, written, filmic, musical, or photographic accounts. In the process of analysis, I consider the many filters that illuminate or obscure the transmission of cultural practices exactly as they were once performed. And I'm using that word sarcastically, facetiously. I first encountered the difference between the attempt to reconstruct a historical event and the desire to reinvent it in my graduate studies here at UC Riverside in the 90s, y'all. I learned to read foyer notation and reconstruct Baroque dances from Linda Tomko. And I also read authors like Mark Franco, Susan Foster, Sally Ness, Walter Benjamin, Claudia Jeschke, Hayden White, Foucault, Derrida, and others who discuss the production of knowledge in history, but in our terms, dance history, for those of us who were here at the time. While we can never fully recapture the original moment of performance, the informed investigation of the conditions that produce the event and the tension surrounding its contemporary reinvention continue to fascinate me. That is, mindfulness and rigorous research still play a role in my own investigation of flamenco as a tradition. And I think that's true of any performer, although it might seem like these decisions are being made spontaneously. I want to recognize movement traditions, and in this case flamenco, as a system of meaning that holds vital information for research. These systems are deep and complex, and we are only beginning to tease out their value in scholarly settings. So, hi! I'm so happy to see you. I gotta,
Is this yours?
yeah, I've got to kind of cruise through a couple of slides to catch up. Which ones?
There you
Let's
go.
see.
Okay.
Okay, so I could do this one
Yep,
to go
that's
forward.
it.
Duncan. Okay.
And if you
This
have
is all of
Spanish.
the things, everything I learned in graduate school in a word cloud. Uh-oh. I gave myself away. Hang on. Dun dun. Okay. So this production of knowledge, the thousands of hours of practice that make a seemingly random decision a deliberate one, fascinates me. I think of how I hear Latin popular music and distinguish between merengue or cumbias or son by moving and then naming. Does anyone else do this? I'm like, but somebody says, what is this? And I'm like, oh, this is merengue. Yeah? Yeah? Because I have to, somebody asked me about a book someone wrote, and I said, it's about, Isadora Duncan. That's just the way I process. I have to have the movement. My body answers first, and then my brain catches up, right? So all of these things have distinct vocabularies, all of these forms, rhythm patterns, melodic structures, and emotional tones, sort of like our son jarochos that we were just talking about. Of course, the way I understand and perform these dances is mediated by any number of cultural discourses that construct my body in space and time. But I would like, in this moment, to advocate for what Claudia Jeschke calls performative knowledge, or what Juan Carlos Lerida, the kind of experimental flamenco artist, refers to as the body's empiricism, and every body has an empiricism, as part of what is recovered through documentation and also what is cultivated in the process of choreography in traditional forms. So it goes both ways, right? Okay, now the big unveil, right? You've already seen it. In 2014, Raúl Rodriguez. Raúl Rodriguez created an exquisite album in Razón de Son. In interviews about the album, he calls it an imaginary folklore that incorporates the varied intercultural dialogue that eventually became flamenco. As we know from our many discussions today alone, these influences come from Andalusia, Latin America, the Caribbean, and the American South. And they are a result of, from the 14th to the 19th centuries, the slave trade and colonialism, which displaced and forced the migration of people and industry back and forth from Spain to the New World. At the same time that I was listening obsessively to this album, new scholarship in flamenco studies drew attention to the Africanist influence in flamenco from scholars like Keimera Goldberg and the release of Gurumbe, which I hope we're going to get to see tonight if I can stay awake. And there are many, many offerings that you can check out in the 2017 Association for the Study of the Worldwide African Diaspora Conference. It's happening in Sevilla in this November. So this is really exploding in terms of flamenco studies and the historical scholarship. During this period of listening in my ostensibly isolated small community in Kansas, a new wave of social justice activists made their voices heard in response to anti-Black violence, physical and symbolic, from racist graffiti in our dorm rooms to the very close murder of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and other fatal shootings of Black Americans by police officers. As I listened to these songs, I read and moved and found rhythms and movements of son, rumba cubana, rumba flamenca, sevillanas, bulerías, and more. Of course, I knew about the zarabanda, perhaps one of the first in a long line of cantes de ida y vuelta, the cultures and bodies that had contributed to these forms from my training and from my scholarly research. Just as the music bears these rhythms and structures of the past that are still intelligible, the traces of the bodies that danced are also present. However, the Africanist elements in flamenco studies seemed until recently to be designated to a footnote or completely erased and obscured by the arguments about the Roma versus Spanish origin of flamenco, right? I mean, anyone in flamenco studies can tell you how that kind of dominated our discussions for, about 100 years, right? And that symbolic violence in a daily news feed that attests to the material violence, the continuing legacy of systemic oppression that persists in our cultures, compelled me to explore and recognize the multiple influences in the dance vocabulary. So, whoop, something happened here. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and go on here. I managed to lose a page. Okay. But what fascinated me most, about Razón de Son wasn't just its anthropomúsica, which Raúl will address tomorrow, but the framing of the work as an imaginary folklore, an act of personal creation as well as archival recuperation. I'll admit I had to research imaginary folklore as a jazz movement that emerged in Europe in the late 1970s. So I managed to find a specific description by musicologist Eckhard Jost that describes the music of this movement in an interesting way, saying the folklore to which the musicians related here was not a really existing one, but one that they found within themselves that formed a part of their own multicultural identity. So it wasn't the model that I had gone to graduate school to historically recreate. It was clearly an act of personal creation. But I think those things are related. I was intrigued, you know, as a choreographer, like what kind of dances would accompany this imaginary folklore, not as they originally occurred, but using the vocabulary and the performative knowledge of what remains, lo que queda. Further, since I choreograph for dance students at a Midwestern university in a predominantly white institution, in a place my friend flamenco guitarist Jose Luis de la Paz affectionately refers to as el culo del mundo. Sorry. It's true. That's how he says it. I'm conscious of my role in the cultural transmission, how any choreography that results is marked by the empiricism of the bodies who perform it and their positions in complex intersecting hierarchies of power. So these questions and musings coalesced into an exploration of practice as research. Now, to be honest, this is a term that I've only recently encountered, although apparently I've been doing it for many years. This was a surprise because I'm on a graduate students committee at the university, Jacksonville University, New York Marquez, who is a flamenco artist and who has performed with some people here. And she's like, you know, PAR, practice as research. And I said, yeah, what kind of school of thought is this? Is this like the Frankfurt School? Is this like, is there a methodology? And she's like, well, no, it's more of an approach, you know, and by the way, you're a part of it. And I was like, oh. Cool, right? But actually it has been documented. It's not just something I made up from my position. It's a methodology that's mainly employed in the visual arts. And it's defined, I'm gonna give you a definition because I find these things helpful. It's artistic research as a mode of art knowledge production. The innovative and critical potential of practice-based research lies in its capacity to generate personally situated knowledge, while at the same time revealing philosophical, social, and cultural context for the critical invention and application of knowledge outcomes. And there are many, I won't name them all, but the one that fascinated me most was the potential of studio-based research to demonstrate how knowledge is revealed and how we come to acquire knowledge. And so I thought, I can get down with this. So in the choreographic process, I focused on the different movement motifs that appear in Afro-Caribbean and flamenco forms. And among those creolized Africanist and European influences, and I did try to do more research into the Arawak Taino presence, but I was able to discover, in fact, that there are still, you know, people who are living as part of the Arawak Taino people in the Caribbean, contrary to what I had been told by people from the Caribbean, other people from the Caribbean. But I don't feel like I did like a short analysis of those works, and so I would welcome anyone's contribution to this. So I'm focusing on mainly this sort of creolized African and European influence, and using that beautifully identified and articulated sort of lexicon that was developed by Brenda Dixon Gottschalk. And you heard a lot about those elements are also present in Constance's work. So I'm just going to show you, these are my students, and some of the Africanist and European influences that you can see in the choreography are knee flexion with hip displacement, and you can see braceo and floreo. And then you can also see mobile torsos, polycentrism, and polyrhythmic structures. And then, other things that it's hard to see without the light being off. So could you hit that? So those of you who have learned Sevillanas, you will see some of that vocabulary here. And you can see palmas. I find it's this circle of people and people dancing together. I find it interesting that we see it in Son Jarocho. We're seeing this across these structures now. And anyone who's been to Feria will notice those postures, ba-ba, ta-ta, ba-ba, at the end of the Sevillanas copla, right? All right. And because this is a Zapateado conference, I had to include, there is at the end a little Zapateado section with palmas, and there are some figures from rumba, the rumba Columbia, which is the solo form that the man does to sort of show off for the group. And then this very curious, I don't know what this is called, if anyone knows, where the heads touch and you do a circle. I saw this in a number of performances, and I'm dying to know what that step is called because it looks so, it's one of those things that is old, but looks so strange it could be avant-garde, you know, when you see it happening. Okay. Da. So, combining the various steps and shapes into patterns that might logically be danced together, creating a syntax for meaning in this system was far more difficult. And that has to do with the body logic or the performative knowledge or empiricism of the dancers in relationship to these dance forms and in their relationship to the music. And I'll explain. The contemporary dancers in this piece bear very little relationship to the social dancers of the past or even contemporary practitioners of flamenco or Latin popular dance in the present, right? Dancers at the University of Kansas are aspiring professional dancers from the academy with regular training in ballet, concert, modern dance, hip hop, and jazz. They take a single semester of flamenco with me as part of their training, and they also take a semester of African dance and classical Indian dance. But that is not enough training to try to perform flamenco or Afro-Caribbean forms. I mean, you just need more immersion than that. So in addition to 3 hours of rehearsal per week for 3 months, students watched videos and documentaries to try to understand the forms, and they read an English translation of Raul's lyrics, and they listened to the cuts from the album. Now, it's very unusual. This is where I start to reflect on the systems of information and cultural transmission, because it's unusual for us to talk about the context and history of a dance form in rehearsal. You go in, you learn the choreography, you go home. Everything is accepted as transparent, when in fact, what has happened is that it's been normativized as invisible. So that information is presented them in lecture courses, not in our practice. Although, here's the thing, we're hybridizing most of our courses because as we expand the curriculum, we find that we have to provide a context because it can't be assumed, right? Outside that canonical dance syllabus. The dancers and I discussed the relationship between African dance and the Caribbean, Spain as a colonial power, the slave trade, the decimation of the Arawak Taino people, the social status of itinerant workers, landowners, slaves, the complex and changing definitions of race, coded expressions of gender and sexuality, and the mechanics of power that govern these categories in different cultural contexts. So that's a lot to try to impart in a single rehearsal process. So in this process, where the effort came out, this effort and disjuncture is the body logic is different between their training and the choreography we were trying to do. These are phenomenal dancers. They're like gazelles, right? They can jump really high. They can spin a lot. They're explosive. And we don't do that kind of movement in this dance. And so it made them vulnerable. They also pick up movement sequences really quickly. Like you do something, and they can repeat it. And it works to their disadvantage because they don't need to repeat movements in order to remember them, to reproduce the sequence. So they don't practice between rehearsals, because why would you? They don't have time, right? But to change the body's organization and its movement logic, to learn a new technique, a dancer needs to repeat sequences and cultivate new tendencies, right? Something happens in your brain. The information moves to a different part of your brain in order to absorb all this. And these accomplished dancers felt ridiculous that they felt vulnerable in forms that were not considered technically difficult. And then, whoa, why is this form not considered technically difficult? And what sort of hierarchies were being erased there? Or power relations were being erased. That, flamenco, what? Like it's hard? Why would you make that assumption? What's underpinning those assumptions? And so we had to open the discussion to the invisibilization of effort in forms outside classical dance, specifically ballet and concert modern dance. We temporarily decentered the discussion from concert to popular or social dances, from high class to working class, from a single European identity to mestizaje. So I'd like to point out a few areas where the effort and the disjuncture is apparent, and then I will show you some very short video clips of them dancing to Raul's music. And I realize that I have created a son blanco here. No, really, because you'll see. And so one of the things that happened is, it's a good thing that we had Constance's presentation, because you'll be able to see this micro bend that happens in the legs versus the straight legs of classical ballet training, right? There's still this, anyone who does flamenco knows that you have to have that micro bend in the knees. Ay Dios mío. pero de verdad. Oh. I killed it. I killed the computer. Okay. But you know what? Oh, yeah. Flexion at the hips versus a lifted pelvis. The displacement of the hips, right? Instead of the squared off pelvis. Can't see me? And being connected to the ground. This is huge. Being connected to the ground as opposed to dancing on top of it, right? I mean, the thing is that this orientation is a whole way of organizing the body. And it's very hard to learn. So, I mean, I'm going to show you I'm not just showing you bad dancing. I'm showing you really good dancers who are trying to enter a system of movement and meaning that is really deep and complex. And that struggle is very telling. Okay, so, all right. So one of these things, another series of things that happen is you'll find that they move their arms like this around a stable torso, but the idea of moving that torso is really difficult. That spiraling kind of movement through the torso is very hard to achieve. And oh my God, the terror of the 12. You would not believe how hard the 12 is on my poor students, right? Because they're used to 4/4 time, preferably with an accent on the downbeat. The first, and the first beat of the measure, s'il vous plaît, right? But this idea, I was having them walk, doing, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, 1, 2, 3. And it was like, no. We had to practice for like 2 hours just to do that. And these are people who could spin on their heads, right? And then we added torso and arms and hands. And it was chaos. And I thought it was all not going to happen for a while. So I'm going to show you just these examples. This is the opening segment. It's very contemporary, and it's based on the idea that all of these images of the dance and the music and the culture are like images from a scrapbook. And I'm showing you because this is probably the strongest it looks. And I don't want you just to see them struggle. But there's still struggle here. So that's how we're going to do this. Let me see if, I think I have to do this. Okay. Oh my God. Is this too? So see, the floreo doesn't complete. And it's very hard for them to stand. Look at this pelvis. But so we have the skirt work. This is actually like a West African step. This is he does a little bit of a Columbia here. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's it. So they're working very hard. Oh no, now you'll see the Sevillana step and the rumba steps, and then you start to see where it breaks down. Hi. So, vuelta quebrada. So this should be, down. Pasada. You're gonna hear. Right there. There we go. I'm gonna, so they come again to this image of the scrapbook that you pull them out of. So I have run out of time, but I want to take you to our conclusions here because it taught us a great deal. The questions I asked myself is, what does it say about the systems of education in higher ed that what it appears that we're doing is we're just, I fear what we're doing is just teaching people ornaments on top of an always already Western classical body. And we're doing it in 4/4 time. And we are not teaching entire systems of meaning. And I think it's really important to teach systems of meaning, right? And it wasn't but it wasn't a failure, you know, when they fell fuera de compás, when they, you know, when the floreo didn't finish, I didn't regard it as a failure because we worked really hard, and what we were able to achieve was this reconsidering of the original context, a temporary recentering of a historical narrative, and recognizing all of these moments where the effort becomes invisible or another culture's contribution becomes invisible. So it is my hope que las raíces huelen. Okay. Oh my gosh. Raíces.